here.
It really wasn't extraordinary. I mean, this literally is a conspiracy. This is not conspiracy theory. This is literally conspiracy. 400 organizations signed this statement, and this is something that you pointed this out. This is something that the statement says, quote, "The media's response to COVID-19 provides a useful model," the statement advises, noting how media were able to control the narrative and compel Americans to comply with safety mandates by referring to the pandemic as an emergency.
Hey, what's up, fellow slaves? I'm going to quickly go over this story that I heard on the Ron Paul Liberty Report the other day. As Daniel McAdams said, this article from the Scientific American basically admits to conspiring with other media agencies to change the narrative from climate change, which was previously global warming, to climate emergency. And they even admit that the reason why they're conspiring to change the narrative from climate change to climate emergency is because they believe that this new label will allow for more government action to be taken against it. They admit that the fear-mongering surrounding the COVID-19 farce that the media pushed was very successful, and they want to have a equally as successful campaign when it comes to addressing climate change. Before I go into covering the main article of this video, I just want to remind people of what the Nazi chief of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, said about the big lie. And this is what he said about the big lie. The big lie, of course, is a propaganda technique. So he said, quote, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its power to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state." So with that quote in mind, let's now address the main article of this video and all of the propaganda and false narratives that come with it. So the article is titled, "We are living in a climate emergency and we're going to say so. It's time to use a term that more than 13,000 scientists agree is needed." So appeal to popularity and, of course, appeal to authority, or at least authority figures. Let's look at how the article starts off. "An emergency is a serious situation that requires immediate action. When someone calls 911 because they can't breathe, that's an emergency. When someone stumbles on the sidewalk because their chest is pounding and their lips are turning blue, that's an emergency. Both people require help right away. Multiply those individuals by millions of people who have similar symptoms, and it constitutes the biggest global health emergency in a century, the COVID-19 pandemic." You gotta love this hook that they give. They reel people in with this hook. It goes on to say, "Now considering the following scenarios, a hurricane blasts Florida, a California dam bursts because floods have piled water high up behind it, a sudden record-setting cold snap cuts power to the entire state of Texas. These are also emergencies that require immediate action." These emergencies can have perfectly natural symptoms. They can be the result of human error. They can be a result of just poor planning. For example, a hurricane blasting Florida. Sorry guys, that's happened for the history of Florida. Nothing new there. So a California dam bursting because floodwaters have piled water high up behind them. It could have burst for several reasons. It could have been put in a poorly planned spot. The dam could have burst because there was poor maintenance and upkeep on it. I mean, right now, our infrastructure all across the United States is in need of repair and maintenance, so we don't really know why the dam burst. And then a sudden record-setting cold snap cuts power to the entire state of Texas. Now, did the entire state of Texas's power get cut because of the cold, or because of the technology that didn't do so well in the cold? Is it because they failed to cold-proof or weather-proof the wind turbines. So could it be some human error? And also, just that idea of a record-setting cold snap, doesn't that kind of disprove this whole narrative of global warming? Oh, that's right. That's why you changed it from global warming to climate change. But while we're on the topic of that, I'm going to just bring up this article. So this article, will snow become a thing of the past as the climate warms? Okay, so they're talking about global warming in this article. Of course, they say, oh no, lots of snow is actually, it goes hand in hand with global warming because the warmth will increase the precipitation coming off of the ocean, which will increase rainfall and which will increase snowfall in the winter months. However, that covers snow. That doesn't cover record-setting cold snaps in states like Texas. See, that's why they had to change the narrative from global warming to climate change. And then, of course, as people show that, hey, actually, climate has always changed, which we will be looking at later on, they have to now change it from climate change to a climate emergency. Because a climate emergency sounds very scary, but it's also very ambiguous. You know, it doesn't really say whether it's the warming emergency or a cooling emergency. It's just that there's an emergency and we need to give these people more money and more power. Okay, let's move on though. So it then basically goes on, after it gives that propaganda, it goes on, given the circumstances, Scientific American has agreed with major news outlets worldwide to start using the term climate emergency in its coverage of climate change. It's great. I love this. So they're admitting that they've all come to an agreement. That means that they all have gotten together and they've all conspired to use this word in order for them to influence public opinion into thinking that the government should handle the supposed climate emergency in the same manner the government handled the supposed public health emergency.
Here.
It really was an extraordinary. I mean, this literally is a conspiracy. This is not conspiracy theory. This is literally conspiracy.
So let's move on. Okay, so an official statement about this decision and the impact we hope it can have throughout the media landscape is below. Okay, so they're doing this, they're changing it because they want to have an impact throughout the media landscape. So it goes on to say, this idea is not a journalistic fancy. We are on solid scientific ground. In January, Scientific American published an article about a study entitled World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency. At the time, more than 11,000 scientists from 153 countries had signed a report to signify their agreement that the world is facing a climate emergency that requires bold action. Bold action. You gotta lock your asses down, restrict your travel, hinder your rights, your God-given rights, your rights that are granted to you by the laws of nature. If you don't believe in God, they are at least granted to you by the laws of nature. They are your human rights. Okay, that's what their bold action is for. So then it goes on to say, as our article said, the adverse effects of climate change are much more severe than expected and now threaten both the biosphere and humanity. What do you mean much more severe than expected? Are you saying anything that Al Gore said came true? Let's look at what Al Gore said.
Some of the models suggest to Dr. Maslowski that there is a 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
And then, of course, nothing else that Al Gore said there came true, even though he tried to narrow it down to this ambiguous thing where it actually didn't have to come true, because he never said it would come true. He said that there was a chance of it coming true. And we're going to look at more of this rhetoric, this total sophistry, okay? But before we do that, let's just take a look at this other article. This is from AEI.org. 50 years of failed doomsday eco-apocalyptic predictions. The so-called experts are 0 and 50. So when this article says they're more severe than expected. They're lying to you. This article is straight up lying to you. They're not more severe than expected because none of the expected predictions or none of the predictions that they made, none of the expectations that they forecasted have come true. So how can they say that it's more severe than they expected when zero of their expectations have come true? If it was more severe than their expectations, I mean, at least a handful of their expectations would have come true, and at least the other expectations, we would have at least see them be partially fulfilled. But that's not the case at all. So the article goes on, every effort must be made to reduce emissions and increase removal of atmospheric carbon in order to restore the melting Arctic and end the deadly cycle of damage that the current climate is delivering. What are you talking about? The climate has always delivered deadly cycles. Nonsense. But it must be known here, every effort must be made. I refer everyone to my Georgia Guidestones video, okay? Just look at what efforts they're pushing towards. They're serious when they say every effort. And you know, they don't care about it being deadly. They want control. This is all about control, not saving lives. If you think that it's about saving lives, just look at their policies that end the lives of hundreds of thousands of people every year. Tens of thousands easily every year, but I will make the leap to say hundreds of thousands every year when you consider the wars, when you consider the destruction of infrastructure from those wars, and all of these other things. Our article also noted that as of January, 1,859 jurisdictions in 33 countries have issued climate emergency declarations. Yep, those 33 countries. You gotta love that symbolism, right? You gotta just love it when they just give themselves away like that. Article goes on to say, journalism should reflect what science says. The climate emergency is here. The statement we have issued was coordinated by Covering Climate Now, a global journalism initiative with more than 400 media partners. Oh my goodness. And then it goes on to show that statement. So right here, this is what Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Liberty Report was talking about. This is blatant and obvious conspiracy. This is them conspiring to change the script to push a new narrative, this new narrative of control. So the article goes on, it gives the statement. An interesting part of this statement, of course, is this statement here. This is a statement of science, not politics. Thousands of scientists, which is in itself an unscientific statement. Science is not an appeal to popularity. Science is not about consensus. It's about data and facts. Show me the data. Don't tell me that thousands of scientists agree to something. Show me the actual data. So, thousands of scientists, including James Hansen, the NASA scientist who put the problem on the public agenda in 1988. Let's look at this guy, James Hansen, okay? So let's look at James Hansen. So it's interesting. I did some research into James Hansen because I was already loosely familiar with him because I try to be loosely familiar with practically everything. So it's a pretty well-published talking point that in 1989, according to a certain article, James Hansen had predicted that the New York City's West Side Highway will be underwater. Now, this article from Electroverse is wrong. Nowhere in the article does it ever give this exact number by 2009. Okay, so I'm going to actually look into this. I'm going to show you this Electroverse article. It talks about, it says that Hansen said this. It also said that he said water will be requested only, and he claimed that by 2019 this would be the claim. That is also not necessarily true. It also says that Hansen in 2008 claimed that the Arctic will be free of summer ice within 5 to 10 years. This is true. This actually he did say. But anyway, let's examine the other things that were supposedly said. Right? So this article from Skeptical Science, which is subtitled Getting Skeptical About Global Warming Skepticism. It's just a bullshit thing, okay? So, but anyway, it does make a good point here. So it examines Hansen's prediction about the West Side Highway. And basically, it can be entirely summed up by what's here in green. So it makes the claim that Hansen was speculating on changes that might happen if CO2 was doubled. So it's like, oh no, Hansen didn't say that the West Side Highway would be flooded in 20, 30, or 40 years. He said that if CO2 doubles, the West Side Highway will be flooded in 20, 30, 40 years. Specifically, it also says that he said 40 years. Okay, he makes the claim that, that this idea that Hansen said it would happen in 20 years is not true, that he actually said it would happen in 40 years. So remember, this article claimed that, this one from the Electroverse claimed that Hansen said it would be underwater by 2009. It never said that. Here's the Salon article. So in the Salon article, the author of the Salon article is talking to another guy, and this other guy makes this claim. He said that he asked Hansen, if what you're saying about the greenhouse effect is true, is anything going to look different down there in 20 years? And then he's like, he looked for a while and was quiet and didn't say anything for a couple seconds. Then he said, well, there will be more traffic. I, of course, didn't think he heard the question right. Then he explained, the West Side Highway, which runs along the Hudson River, will be underwater, and there will be tape across the windows across the street because of high winds. And the same birds won't be there. The trees in the medium strip will change. Then he said, there will be more police cars. Why? Well, you know what happens to crime when the heat goes up. And then it goes on to say, and so far, over the last 10 years, we've had the 10 hottest years on record. Nonsense. So, didn't he also say that restaurants would have signs in their windows that read water by request only? Anyway, the article goes on to say, when did he say this will happen? Even though the article made it clear before this that this conversation happened in 1988. So 1988, 20 years would be 2000, basically 2009. Right? And that's where the Electroverse gets the 2009 from. Even though Hansen never said 2009, he never gave that thing. He never gave that date. So the article goes on to say, when did he say this will happen? Within 20 or 30 years. And remember, he had this conversation in 1988 or 1989. And then the article goes on to say, does he still believe these things? Yes, he still believes everything. I talked to him a few months ago, and he said he wouldn't change anything that he said then. Well, of course, because what he said then, according to the actual facts, came with the caveat of, if CO2 doubles. So, I mean, he really didn't say anything all those years ago. He was just talking like a sophist. He was just, pushing rhetoric that will never either be right or wrong because of its parameters. The reason why I had to go into all that detail, because it does show that even sites that are that try to push the truth, like this Electroverse fucking site, clearly pushing a false narrative itself. And this does not help the truth at all. Because some truther will come across this article, they'll read it, and they probably won't do any research. They'll just be like, okay, I got all the information I need to know. I mean, if it wasn't true, this article wouldn't say it, right? No, it's partially true. Not really fully true. There's more to the story, and then they're gonna repeat the story to somebody who knows the other parts of the story, and the other person who knows those other fucking irrelevant details, really mostly irrelevant, is gonna be like, well, see, you don't know all the facts. You've just read an article. And they would be right. Sadly enough, they would be right. So anyway, let's go back to the main article, the Scientific American article. So it goes on to say, why emergency? Because words matter. To preserve a livable planet, humanity must take action immediately. Failure to slash the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will make the extraordinary heat, storms, wildfires, and ice melt of 2020 routine and could render a significant portion of the Earth uninhabitable, were in the January Scientific American article. So then it goes on to say, the media's response to COVID-19 provides a useful model. Guided by science, journalists have described the pandemic as an emergency, chronicled its devastating impacts, called out disinformation and told audiences how to protect themselves with masks and social distancing, for example. And then it basically just goes on to this bullshit. We need the same commitment to the climate story. As partners in covering climate now, a global consortium of hundreds of news outlets, we will present coverage in the lead up to Earth Day, April 22nd, 2021, around the theme, Living Through the Climate Emergency. So that's going to be their narrative. They're going to push that all the way up until Earth Day, which is actually just a couple days away from now. So you know what? I'm going to finish this article by covering some facts. I'm going to cover some facts. I'm also going to provide a solution. I'll get to the solution last. So let's look at the Arctic sea ice extent. The Arctic sea ice has decreased over the summers from 1980 to 2018. This map comes from an EDU site, so it's mostly trusted. So on the left is, of course, the Arctic sea ice. Of course, the Arctic is the North Pole, the Antarctic is the South Pole. So the Arctic sea ice in September of 1980 looked like this. The Arctic sea ice as of 2018, September, looks like this. Of course, it obviously has reduced. It's not much different in the winter if you look at the winter, but scientists will always say, oh, it doesn't matter what it looks like in the winter. What matters is that it's getting thinner, so that will lead to a total collapse in the summer sea ice. It's not going to happen. I mean, you can look at different summer sea ice levels. You'll find that it's not like it's shrinking uniformly. There have been some summers where some parts of it were further out in some areas and whatever. The fact is that the Earth has been warming since the end of the last ice age. If it wasn't, the last ice age wouldn't have ended. Okay, and it's actually funny, if you go to this Associated Press article from 1989, June 29th, 1989, the year I was born, all right, 1989. So anyway, UN predicts disaster if global warming not checked. All right, so it's just this fear-mongering article from 1989. In 1989, they said that we had until the year 2000, to do something about the global warming, or else it'd be over. The whole world would be in collapse. It's basically like the same bullshit that AOC was just pushing a couple years ago. But interesting, in this article, it admits, the differences may seem slight, he said, but the planet is only 9 degrees warmer now than during the 8,000-year ice age that ended 10,000 years ago. That's the thing. The climate has always been changing. We've always been going through periods that were warmer, other periods that were colder. That has been happening for the entire history of this planet. You don't believe me? You can Wikipedia sea level heights or something, I believe something like that. You can type that into Google and you'll get a sea level chart like this. This one goes back to 22,000 years ago. And this is the sea level 22,000 years ago. It was 120 meters below what it is today. Actually, more than 120 meters lower than it is today. And this in itself should be a fascinating thing. I don't know why historians don't take this into account when discussing things like Atlantis and other such lost cities. The sea level was 120 meters lower back then. That's basically almost 400 feet. So the sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today, okay, 22,000 years ago. So they want to say that all of this sea level rise that occurred between 22,000 years ago, and they're claiming the human activity from the industrial era, so really, we should only really go back to let's go back 200 years ago for them. So from 22,000 years ago to 200 years ago, they're saying all of that sea level rise was normal, but what's going on over here in this last blip, that's man-made. Those couple inches, totally man-made. We have to have a climate emergency. We need to treat this like a climate emergency. We need to start treading on people's rights. We need to start locking down economies. We need to make the world poor. We need to destroy our technology. And we need to just basically go back to living in caves. Okay, that's their narrative. And this is the problem with them not showing the data. They're not showing any actual data. They're just like, these scientists agree. How many scientists? Thousands of scientists. Tens of thousands of scientists. All of these countries. We have the whole world agreeing with us. Well, as Gandhi said, even if I'm a minority of one, the truth is still the truth. Now, if we look at the other chart that they have on that Wikipedia page, it goes actually back to 542 million years ago. Going from left to right to left is most recent, to the right is the oldest. Look at this chart. These are actually two different graphs, too, on the same chart. Okay, this is sea level. Okay, this is global sea level fluctuations. So all of this history, all of this up and down, all of this climate change that occurred here, many different ups and downs here, all of that perfectly natural. But what's going on over here at the very end, it wouldn't even register on this graph. It's like the 0 point. That little blip, those couple inches, totally man-made. Yeah, no natural cycles there. Has nothing to do with natural cycles of the sun, or has nothing to do with sea currents, has nothing to do with volcanic activity, has nothing to do with any of that. It's all tied to the little ants crawling on the surface known as human beings, and their little ant activity. And that's what it is, really. I mean, our activity is just... Now, what's the solution? The solution is definitely not only making videos like this. The solution, it goes back to the Constitution. The Constitution grants these psychopaths the power to pretty much do anything. They have more power than the King of England had during the Revolutionary War. They have incredible power, unlimited power to do anything that they believe is for the public good, the welfare, other caveats that you find in the preamble of the Constitution. So what we need to do is we need to have a new constitution that prevents the government from playing God. I'm going to end the video here. I'll see you fellow slaves in the next video.